Welcome to the wonderful world of books, one of seven worlds in Seven World Productions, a subsidiary of Angelgram Music. My name is Gino, and I am sole owner of Angelgram Music and executive director of Seven World Productions. Continuing in our series In Search of Beauty, here is Chapter 9, Sharon. Hope you enjoy. Previously on In Search of Beauty. By the summer of 1968, my father made another attempt at open heart surgery. This is a surgery in which the patient's heart is opened and surgery is performed on the internal structures of the heart. On July 1968, as I was bagging groceries at Kroger, my father passed away on the operating table from complications with the heart-lung machine, and my life took a serious and abrupt turn. The mentor of my life was gone forever, never again to hear the works of his genius. Chapter 9, Sharon. Our psyches are so well developed with defense mechanisms that we are able to block out our most painful events in our lives in order to survive. It is only years later that slowly those memories are released back into our consciousness as we become better equipped to process them. Such was my case. I can now recall that moment when a church member came into Kroger and tearfully informed me of the passing away of my father. I remember how stunned I was as I walked over to the store's manager and told him I had to leave. I remember the car ride in the church member's car to the dairy factory where my brother Steve worked, and how this church member drove us the 50 miles from Flint to Detroit. My mother and youngest brother Paul had been at Ford Hospital in Detroit during the operation. Tears did not fall at first, even though we had been warned that death was a possibility. You are never fully prepared for such an event. I know I wasn't. I remember the service at the church, where over 200 people crowded into a sanctuary equipped to handle maybe 50. People from around the country came to Flint to pay their last respects to my father. I played the organ and tried my best to play my best. I still shed no tears. I remember the moments afterwards in the parsonage as I walked down the hallway and entered the parlor, and I glanced at my reflection in the mirror over the fireplace amid gentle and soft sobbing coming from my grandmother and mother as they were seated on the sofa opposite the fireplace. In that instant of seeing myself, I remembered a dream I had when I was but 8 years old, and seeing that very picture of me looking into that mirror in my dream and hearing the soft sobbing. In that split second, all of time had stopped, and I felt an eternal presence come upon me that I could not explain. Even now in the retelling of it, I find it so baffling and bewildering that such a thing could happen. Mr. and Mrs. Mack attended the funeral and offered me a room at their farm in Ann Arbor so I could attend the School of Music as planned. I was very grateful. And so it was that in August of that faithful year, I quit working for Kroger, gave up all my piano students, and moved to Ann Arbor to start my junior year. The day I departed from Flint, I said goodbye to Wanda. She cried and was so upset she threw my class ring that she had been wearing across the field behind her parents' house where she was living. I just got into my VW and left my ring in that field as Wanda sobbed. I had broken another heart. At the School of Music in Ann Arbor, I had to take a placement exam for all of my music theory credits. Since those credits did not transfer anywhere, every student transferring had to take it. I found 2 mistakes in the test and noted it on the exam card. The next day, the chairman of the Theory and Composition department called me into his office. He thanked me for pointing out the mistakes and explained that that's what happens when you let a graduate student compose the test. He also noted that my major was music education with choral and instrumental conducting and piano performance, my double majors and voice as a minor. He asked me would I consider changing one of my majors to music theory and composition. I told him no. I wanted to be a high school or a college choral instrumental conductor. The chairman said very well. His name was Ross Lee Finney, the resident composer at the school. I had decided that in order for our family to heal from my father's death, we should travel from Michigan to Wooster, Ohio, and visit my godfather and his family. We had been very close in years past, and I needed to be with someone like that over the first Thanksgiving holiday without my dad. I had further decided that I would drive my VW up to Flint from Ann Arbor to pick up my mom and my two younger brothers. We packed the trunk, which was in the front of the vehicle, with our luggage and left Flint around 1 a.m. because I wanted to arrive in Wooster by morning. We took Route 23, which is a 4-lane highway south out of Flint. My mom was sitting in the front passenger seat and my brothers were in the back seat. When we reached the Michigan-Ohio border in Sylvania, Route 23 was supposed to change to a 2-lane road. Instead, we encountered a blacktop road with no white lines on the sides or center. There were no signs anywhere. Later, I would learn that the state of Ohio had prematurely opened this new section of highway to accommodate the expected crowds of travelers to the Michigan-Ohio State football rivalry game on Thanksgiving Day. I was traveling around 60 miles an hour when all of a sudden the road veered to the right at a sharp angle. I had inadvertently entered an exit ramp designed for 20 miles an hour, not 60. I could not maintain control of the vehicle, and we tumbled end over end off of the ramp into soft, soggy landscape recently worked on for the new road. My mom and brothers walked away from this accident with minor cuts and bruises. I, on the other hand, had several fractured vertebrae, a fractured sternum, contusions of the heart, lung, eye, and facial muscles. I was in intensive care at Toledo Hospital for 5 days, and it was questionable that I would live. After the 6th day, the pain in my back had subsided, and they moved me to a ward with 3 other patients. The neurosurgeon who examined me recommended that there be no operation. He said that because of my youth I would heal without surgery. I was not allowed to get on my feet for at least 3 weeks, after which I would have to wear a tailored steel brace for at least 6 months. While I was recuperating, a nurse came to see me on a regular basis to give me medicine for pain and to bathe me. Her name was Sharon. She was several years older than me, a charming brunette who wore braces and had a very infectious smile. Sharon constantly spoke about an amusement park in Sandusky, Ohio that was huge with many rides, but above all else she said it was very clean. Sharon was sure that I would like it there and gave me the impression that she wanted me to take her there on a date in the upcoming summer. I was skeptical because I didn't think much about amusement parks. I had no desire for riding death-defying rides after having been in a death-defying accident. So I put her suggestion out of my mind and concentrated on keeping up with my studies while on the mend. I did like her, and when I was released in December, I asked her out for a New Year's Eve celebration in Toledo at one of the hotels. The insurance paid for the down payment on a new car, a 1969 Opel Kadett station wagon. On New Year's Eve, I drove my new car from Ann Arbor, Michigan down to Toledo and spent New Year's Eve partying with Sharon. All she talked about was Cedar Point, the amusement park in Sandusky, Ohio. I tried to keep that out of our conversations. It was so cold when we left at the end of the evening, I could not unlock my new Opel and had to call her father to come help us. I was embarrassed, and needless to say, we never dated again. I went back to Ann Arbor and returned to school. Then, in the month of March, I was walking to class one day in the School of Music. In doing so, I would pass by a large bulletin board in the hallway leading to the auditorium for my conducting class. You know what a bulletin board in a college is like. It's filled with advertisements of all kinds, selling books, room letting, roommates wanted, books needed, classes of all kind, etc. I had walked past that bulletin board 100 or more times and never noticed anything of interest for me until that fateful day in March 1969. A poster in the lower right-hand corner caught my eye. It had a large Ferris wheel on it with the name Cedar Point. I drew closer to the poster as if hypnotized and read about this amusement park Sharon had so adamantly drilled into my brain. They were holding auditions for live entertainment in Ann Arbor only on that day. On the poster was a picture of a man whose name was Charles R. Meeker, Jr., the first of three men who have guided the fortunes of the Dallas Summer Musical Theater for most of its fabled history, appeared on the scene when the legendary figure of Charles R. Meeker took control of the theater in 1945. Providentially, perhaps, Mr. Meeker served as mentor to two young men, Tom Hughes and Michael Jenkins, in the 40s and 50s, who were to succeed him in later years, continuing to bring quality entertainment to local audiences decade after decade. A native of West Virginia, Mr. Meeker came to Dallas in 1932 to attend Southern Methodist University, graduating 4 years later with a degree in journalism. He immediately entered show business by going to work for the Interstate Theaters Organization, which operated vaudeville palaces largely converted to movie theaters by 1935 throughout the Southwest. In 1944, the State Fair Association decided the Starlight operettas needed a full-time executive director, and it tapped Mr. Meeker. Mr. Meeker quickly began to book more contemporary Broadway musicals, and he made a number of physical changes to the Fair Park band shell, including a moving platform system that allowed rapid changes on stage. Mr. Meeker introduced the STARS system at the theater in 1947, at a time when operettas continued to be the theater's mainstay. He persuaded Mary Martin to open her national tour of Annie Get Your Gun in Dallas, setting box office records, 105,000 people in 2 weeks. 2 years later, he revived Rodgers and Hart's Pal Joey with its original Broadway star Vivian Siegel. Almost written off at its debut in 1942, Pal Joey, thanks to Mr. Meeker's production, returned to Broadway the next season and won critical reviews. This system continued to characterize the theater's operation for decades, until audiences became more attracted to a show title than to a star appearing in whatever name. After 10 years in the band shell, the Starlight operettas were able to move inside the music hall in 1951, thanks to the installation of air conditioning. They gained a new name, the State Fair Musicals. The move indoors to the music hall was not only an obvious boost to audience comfort, it allowed greater flexibility and creativity in the way shows were staged. The next year, he reviewed Porgy and Bess with Leontine Price and William Warfield. Some might have called it risky to stage such a show with an all-black cast at a mainstream theater in the South, but Mr. Meeker was a gambler, and in this case, his gamble paid off. The production was a sensation. After its premiere in Dallas, Gershwin's opera went to a worldwide tour. Throughout the 1950s, Mr. Meeker kept the stars marching across the stage of the music hall. Debbie Reynolds, Jose Ferrer, Jack Benny, Giselle McKenzie, Jeanette MacDonald, Judy Garland, and many, many more. He also brought in major musical directors such as Franz Ehlers, who went on to conduct My Fair Lady on Broadway, and top choreographers. As one columnist observed at Mr. Meeker's death, Mr. Meeker knew all of the show business greats. Nobody will quibble about that. It takes one to know one. Operettas began to fade from the scene in the 50s, a decade when touring shows and personality shows also became part of the pattern of a typical summer season. The Jack Benny Review in 1954 was the first of a series of personality shows to also include such glittering names as Carol Burnett, Mitzi Gaynor, Carol Channing, and Jim Nabors, among others, over the years. Mr. Meeker was also something of a juggler. While managing the State Fair musicals, he also staged such affairs as the Cotton Festival in San Angelo, and was entertainment director of the Statler Hilton's Empire Room in downtown Dallas. He was the producer of live entertainment at various venues at Cedar Point. I read further that he was also the executive producer of the Miss Teenage America pageant on CBS. He had also previously produced live entertainment for Six Flags Over Georgia and Six Flags Over Texas. They were offering paid positions for musicians, stage performers of all kinds. Anyone with any kind of talent was encouraged to audition and earn some spending money in the summer. The audition schedule showed auditions being held in several cities in the 4 to 5 state nearby area. It showed that they were holding auditions that very day in Ann Arbor in a ballroom of a local hotel. This would be the only day they would be here. So I decided to give it a try and went there wearing my tailored brace underneath my clothes and carrying the score to carousel. I was going to sing the soliloquy as my audition song. When I got to the hotel, they had already started the auditions. I quickly filled out my application and noticed that I was last. I sat down to listen to other people auditioning. One singer after another got up and sang. After listening to all those singers, I became leery of my choice as a singer and nearly walked out. Just as I was about to decide to leave, my name was called. I got up and went toward the front of the room where there was a piano in front of a desk. Seated at that desk was a middle-aged gentleman who I recognized as Mr. Meeker, a red-headed young woman, and 2 other young men. I quickly put my score down on top of the piano and turned toward the occupants at the desk and the rest of the people who had stayed and made the following statement. I will play for you my own piano transcription of the Saber Dance by Aram Kakachurian from his Gain Ballet. As I sat down at the piano thinking how ridiculous this was, I decided to have some fun and played the Saber Dance as fast as I could, remembering the time when I was 6 and heard Oscar Levant play this piece on the Ed Sullivan Show. At the end of the piece, there was thunderous applause from the 15 or so people who stayed. Mr. Meeker responded by saying, now that my musical director, Bob Westbrook, has picked up his jaw from the floor, let's see if you can play for us from that fake book he will give to you. A fake book is a collection of well-known songs with only the melody line, lyrics, and chords written on each page. In some fake books, there may be several songs on a page to accommodate a large volume of songs in one book. Musicians use these all the time. The origin of the word fake book comes from the old days in the 30s and 40s when royalty was not paid to composers and lyricists for these compilations, and these books were sold in the black market of sheet music. In the 60s and 70s, they became legalized and were popular forms of compilations of songs used by producers to write music reviews and shows for different venues. This fake book was placed in front of me, and at the time I was not familiar with them at all. However, I had a class at the music school where we had to add accompaniment to single melody lines, and therefore I was prepared to play the song they asked me to sight read. After playing the song, Mr. Meeker called me over to the table where he and the others were sitting. He asked me who I was studying conducting with in school. I told him Maynard G. Klein at the School of Music at the University of Michigan. He made a note on his card and then looked at me over his half glasses and said, "Very good audition." We shook hands, and then I left thinking, I probably will not hear from them. The very next morning, Mr. Meeker's associate, Mac Martin, called and offered me a position as the piano player in the pit orchestra of their ballroom show at Cedar Point. The position would pay $90 a week plus room and board for 12 weeks of work from Memorial Day through Labor Day. I took the offer, and I had Sharon, the nurse, to thank for engraving into my memory a place that would later become like a second home to me. If you like this episode, click like and add your comments. Better still, why don't you subscribe if you haven't already so that you may receive email notifications of future episodes. Also, check out our other worlds at Seven World Productions: the world of art, the world of faith, the world of family, the world of food, the world of games, and the world of music. Go and be inspired.